Okay, so while the car is still on the ground, we're going to break the lug nuts loose. We're not going to take them off entirely, just maybe a half to one full rotation just to break them loose so that when the car's in the air and the wheel spins, it won't be that hard to get the lug nuts off. So we'll just take our 21 millimeter breaker bar here, and we'll just go into each of these lug nuts and break them loose. Next, we're going to lift the car into the air using a floor jack, and we will place it on a jack stand. So that's important to remember when lifting. So we're lifting here on the frame of the car that comes through here, and we're leaving enough space next to it for the jack stand to go. So if you lift over here with a jack, it's going to be hard to put a jack stand under there because the jack will be in the way, so just keep that in mind. So now the car is resting on the jack stand, and make sure that it safely cradles that part of the frame so that everything's safe. Now that the car is in the air, I like to take my electric impact or my air-powered one and just very quickly remove all the lug nuts. So this can help speed the process up quite a bit. With all the lug nuts removed, you can now remove the wheel. Okay, so with the wheel off the car, what I'm going to do is disconnect this whole arm up here that connects to the hub and take it in and have them push the old ball joint out and press the new one in. That's really a lot easier than trying to mess with this thing. These presses work okay if they're the right ones for the job, but the one that I rented sucks. And you can see how long this ball joint is. It's very tall. And the problem with these is this piece is really short, and so it wobbles. It's really hard to get a good good grip on it. So anyway, this is the way that I'm going to do it, and I think it's the better way. Okay, so following from the wheel inside, this is the tie rod system. There's the inner tie rod and the outer tie rod. We're going to come to the inner tie rod here, and we're going to take this bolt off. And as you see, it has a cotter pin in it. I don't know if you can see that. So we're going to have to bend this pin straight forward and then pull this pin out. Okay, so I took a few minutes with these flat nose pliers. I bent this out and smashed them together the best I could to get them as straight as I could. Then I like to get some vice grips on here just so that they don't let loose, and then just pull it straight out. Kind of takes a little wiggling. You work it enough, you'll be able to pull it right out. I have had these break before, and it's no fun to try to dig them out of there. So, alright, so now we're going to use our 19 millimeter socket to take that tie rod end bolt off. And so it's 19 millimeter or 3/4 inch. Both of those seem to work. Okay, so now that that's off, we can go ahead and just pound directly down on the old tie rod. Just get a hammer and knock it down and through. Alright, a few whacks, knocks it right through. I like to reattach all the pieces that I can just so they don't get lost. Okay, with our 1/2-inch drive, we'll just take out these two bolts, and they're holding the bracket on that holds the brake line on. So we'll just drive them off real quick. Set that aside and put those two bolts back in there. So next we're going to come into our lower ball joint right here, which is what we're replacing. And we're going to go ahead and pull that cotter pin out, and that 7/8 inch nut we're going to zip off with our impact. So we straightened out the cotter pin. Now just grab our pliers here and just pull it out. Okay, you can do that with a regular hand tool. It's just a little faster that way. Now we're going to come around the back side here, and with a 22mm, we're going to take out these two bolts here. There's that one and that one, and they hold the brake caliper on. So we'll take those out, pull it off, and set it on here. And set it on a bucket so that the brake caliper doesn't fall. So next you're going to lift off this rotor. Sometimes there's a little washer on here that holds it in place, so take that off if there is, but otherwise it just kind of comes off like a tire. Just lift the rotor off and set it aside. Okay, next there's two more of these connections. One's up here, but we're going to do it last because that's what's going to be holding up this arm in the very end. So next we're going to go after this one right here. Once again, another cotter pin that will straighten out, pull out, and undo that nut. Okay, this is a 19mm nut that we're taking off. So now this control arm is free. That goes in here. So now we just have to take out this last one up here. So another cotter pin. So I straightened out that cotter pin. Okay, just pull that cotter pin out. Okay, then the 17mm nut here, that's the last one for this whole control arm. This whole thing. Except for there is one 12mm nut right here that we need to take off, and it holds the ABS sensor on. So on the back side here, it's a 12mm nut that holds on the ABS sensor. So once you take it out, the ABS sensor itself just also comes free, and you can put that back in so you don't lose it. Yeah, so right here, this is what we have, and this is our lower ball joint that we're going to go have pushed out and pressed in. And I'll show you on the bottom real quick in case you are doing this yourself. It has a snap ring right here. So these are meant to spread as you push them in, kind of the opposite of pliers. So if you don't have these, you can still use needle nose pliers. But basically you want to put these in the grooves. Then as you compress this ring, it spreads the clip out, and then you can get it off. So now this is where we're going to press it through that way, down towards the top of it. But we're probably going to take it to a place to have that done. So the ball joint press kit that I borrowed really wouldn't do the trick. And so I just took these into a shop and had them press in the new ball joints. They did a really good job. They even cleaned up some of these other surfaces really nice. So they did a good quality job, and you know, sometimes it's not what you're expecting to go spend a little more money, you know, here and there, but sometimes, like, I'm pressed for time, so this is a good example where sometimes it's better just to drop it off and have them press it in with the proper tools. The $800 press kit that they had compared to the one I had when I rented, and so sometimes it's just better to do it that way, or it's more convenient that way. Okay, so putting everything back together, I would recommend first hanging it up here. So just put it through here and put the bolt on just tight enough to hold it up a little bit. And then you'll come over here and put on your tie rod end. Now before you put this control arm on, make sure you take this cone-shaped spacer that was on the old one. In this case, I don't even think this new one came with one. And make sure you drop it on first. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time tightening everything down. And then this other lower control arm end, make sure you do not put that one into here. It'll get stuck. Ask me how I know. accidentally made that mistake. But anyway, then put your new ball joint, hook it back up to that control arm, just like you took it off. Now it's a little bit different on sizes, just because the hardware for aftermarket is a little different. This is a 15/16. Both of these are going to be a 19 millimeter, so we'll go ahead and tighten them up right now. Get a floor jack and lift on the very bottom where that new ball joint is. Try not to crush that little guy in there. And lift so that you have as many threads coming through the top as possible. Then crank it down really as tight as you can get it. I have a big breaker bar up there, and I'm tightening this down because that was my question. I had it too. The castle nut, you know, with the cotter pin, the hole's at the very, very top. So it makes you think that the nut might not go on very far, but you have to tighten it pretty much all the way until it's tight, until you can't turn it anymore. It'll smash that boot. That's normal. Okay. One thing to mention too, these are two different new control arms. I got them from different companies. And this one requires the socket to go down into the control arm. So you need a shallow socket. And what I mean by that is when you look at these impact ones, they're very thick on the front. The sidewall is very thick and they will not go down in there. So be prepared to have some regular sockets if you have a control arm like this. Okay, then tighten this one up here. It was a 17 millimeter and it also has a cotter pin. So our tie rod nut is fastened. Same with our lower control arm one here with the cotter pin going through it. We have our ball joint one completed. This one's nice and tight up here. Next, just hang the brake rotor on and we'll reattach the caliper just by sliding it right over. You shouldn't have to compress this if you didn't change any of the pads or the rotor. I'd put a little bit of Loctite on any of these bolts that don't have a cotter pin especially, and these are the ones going in the back of the caliper. And just go back into those two slots once we line it up. Okay, next connect your bracket here that holds the brake lines and make very, very, very sure that they are not twisted. You'll notice because they'll have a kink in them like a garden hose and they'll be too short. You do not want that because you turn the steering wheel, you could rip them out. So just make sure that everything is nice in the way it should be. So guys, once again, when you're done, you should not be able to wobble this wheel. If you wobble the wheel back and forth and that ball joint is still loose, then it's not tight enough. It should be firm. You shouldn't be able to rock the wheel back and forth. Remember, this also has new tie rod ends in it from my other video. If you haven't seen that, check it out. But that could also be a reason why it might have some wobble, but make sure that that new ball joint doesn't have any wobble in it. So I'm putting the wheel back on, and just a quick tip here. Hold the wheel in place and kind of hold it with your foot to keep it flat, and hold it up here to keep it flat, and then just put in two lug nuts in opposite spots and tighten them down, you know, most of the way. And then your hand's free, you can thread the rest of them. So don't sit there trying to hold it the whole time. It's just a little tip that I wanted to pass on. So once you have these threaded on there pretty good, don't just drive them on with a gun. You can go ahead and finish tightening them down for the most part. Use the star pattern where you're going across each time. Then we'll lower the car, and right as it barely touches the ground and the wheel won't spin, we'll torque these down to 95 foot-pounds. Okay, so go ahead and lift on the frame of the car there, where we lifted before. Pull the jack stand out, and now slowly let the jack down until the wheel is barely touching the ground. There. And that'll keep it from spinning as we torque them to 95 to 100 foot-pounds. Go ahead and torque all these down. Use the star pattern where you're alternating to directly across to the other lug nut, and that helps get it on even. And then go around and do this a few times.